Here we are. Hello, Michelle. We are live now on Facebook and on LinkedIn page of EMCC Romania. We are so glad to have you with us. And
Lovely to be here.
for those who don't know you very well, I have to say that you are EMCC Global Supervision Award winner for the last year. And
I know.
also, you are the author of a great book, and
Mm,
this is part of our conversation for
mm.
today. That actually will be a short introduction about supervision, which is usually called 101.
Yeah,
And from that, we'll go to your most recent book, which is 101 Coaching Supervision Techniques.
that's right. Yeah. Thank you, Vlad. Nice to be here and nice to have the opportunity to. Actually, this is my first opportunity to do a live stream. So, there's no
Okay.
safety net with this. Who knows what's going to happen?
Yes. No, we'll keep it as safe as we can, and if the techniques will not be smooth, then everybody will understand that we are live
Yeah.
and we do our best. So, should I put the presentation on?
Yeah, lovely. Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah. So,
the floor is yours.
thank you. Well, yes, I mean, the title was something Vlad and I were discussing as we were thinking about this opportunity. And the title of my book is 101 Techniques in Coaching Supervision. And it can often be misread, as Vlad said, to 101, which is often a kind of Americanism, I think, for, sort of introductory stuff. So we thought, well, why not? Let's honor that and have a conversation which ranges from the basics to perhaps some of the more complex ways of working in supervision as captured by the book. So yeah, that's our title. It's a pleasure to be here, and yeah, we've got a few slides to kind of prompt our discussions, and then we'll pause, and then I think Vlad and I are going to have a bit of a chat, and then we'll move on to the next kind of segment. So in terms of structure, this is what we were planning to do. Let's see if it's actually what we do. I think we've got about an hour in the diary, so we'll see how we go with time. And yeah, we're going to start with the 101 of supervision, the basics. We're going to think about what is supervision and why is it important. Then we'll move on to think about what kinds of supervision there are and have a little bit of discussion about what are the pros and cons of each type. Then we'd like to invite you to think about the application of supervision. So, really thinking through how you're going to know what supervision you will personally need. And then we'll end up with the book. And there's 101 techniques in there. Some of them I wrote myself, but there were actually 42 contributors to get that book over the finish line. So there is, as the title suggests, plenty to choose from. But I'd be lying if I didn't say that, I do have some favorites in amongst there. And I'm going to share just a few of those with you. And yeah, just talk you through why I like them and how I use them. So that's our kind of outline for today.
Great, Michelle. Thank you very much. And is a moment to say that each one who is looking to watching us can ask question in chat, and
Oh, yeah.
we'll take them. And it's also an opportunity to say hello to Christina Mule, who is watching us, and send us comments. So we'll see everything, and we'll try to answer if there are some questions or comments.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, I've just changed my view so that I can see comments. So I'll keep an eye, but if you can keep an eye too, Vlad, so that we don't miss things.
Sure.
Lovely. So if I move on.
Yeah.
So let's start with the basics. What is coach supervision? And those of you who know me, or those of you who don't yet know me, will discover that my preferred processing style is visual. So when I'm thinking about explaining what supervision is, I often use this optical illusion. So Vlad, I'm putting you on the spot here, but if you look at this image, and bear with me because it will become clear why I'm using this momentarily. What is it that you see when you first look at this image, Vlad? What do you see?
The first image is about two elderly people, a man and a woman. Then I can see, I think, two Mexicans. One is a guitar. Then I think I see someone entering a door.
Over here?
Or actually getting out from a house, I think.
Yes.
And I believe there are some models as well there. And of course, at the end, there is a royal kind of glass, I hope.
What, here in the middle or somewhere else?
Here in the middle.
Yeah, in the middle. Yeah, lovely. So I'm also inviting those who are watching and streaming in, if they can spot things, then do let us know. Be useful to see what else is seen. But yeah, what you've kind of first spotted is the elderly couple facing each other. And some of you might have seen that kind of perceptual diagram of the vase and the faces. So there's a bit of that here. There's maybe a goblet or a vase in the center, and then the two people. And as you rightly say, that in the faces, there seems to be two perhaps Mexicans with the little, forget what they call it, sombrero, is it? And a guitar. And then something you've not mentioned, but sometimes people see, is something that looks a bit like a glass bottle or maybe an earring on the old woman. If I mention it, can you see it anywhere, Vlad? The earring.
Yeah, I can see it. I didn't know what is exactly, but now as you mentioned, I can see it. And
Lovely.
Also, Christina is seeing a beam of light that is transformed into a vase.
Yes, so I think that's also great. It's sometimes this looks a bit like a lampshade, and as you say, it's converting into a vase. Other people kind of pay attention to this kind of jagged edge and think that that looks maybe a little bit like a crown of some description. There's also, the more we look, the more we see. And so if I invite you to search for a tortoise, not just you, Vlad, but any of our audience, see if you might find a tortoise or indeed a rabbit. They're two separate things. Just have a look and see if you can see that.
Yeah. This is kind of quest.
Yes. So it's towards the bottom of the image.
Okay, I get the rabbit.
Aha, where's the rabbit?
In between the two persons at the bottom line. But yeah, you are right. I got also the turtle. It's on the woman shoulder.
On her shoulder. Fabulous. Lovely. Yeah. So this is beginning to explain what supervision is. And I can see we have a question from Alina in terms of the common elements and differences between supervision and intervision. So maybe we come back to that when we have our little pause. But the reason we engage in supervision, I think, is quite simple, which is together we can see more than any one of us can see alone, because there's almost too much to process sometimes. And what is interesting is most people's first reaction in your instance, Vlad, was the elderly couple. When you meet this again, I suspect the first thing you'll see is the elderly couple. And that's because we'll always enter into a situation with our own perspective and our own biases. However, now that we've had this conversation, you'll also remember where the tortoise and the rabbit is. So you'll be on the lookout for them. And that's how, through either individual or group supervision, I think it increases our perspectives, it increases our awareness, and perhaps increases our curiosity as to what else might be there that we've not yet, either of us, noticed. So that's my kind of starter for 10 in terms of what supervision is all about. I thought it would be useful just to refresh people's memories around what the EMCC believes supervision is. And this is what's on the website this year. It says supervision is the interaction that occurs when a mentor or coach brings their coaching or mentoring work experiences to a supervisor in order to be supported and to engage in reflective dialogue and collaborative learning for the development and benefit of the mentor or coach, their clients, and their organizations. And I think what's lovely about that is the notion of having a reflective dialogue. So, really looking back or even perhaps looking forward and collaborating together so that we learn together. And importantly, the benefit is obviously the mentor or the coach, but it's bigger than that. It's also for their clients and their organizations. So there's quite a good echo, if you like, between what the EMCC is describing as supervision and what I described as supervision along with David Clutterbuck and Karen Whitaker. And that was back in 2016. It's quite a lengthy definition, but that's because there were a number of points that we wanted to get across. And I put those in the purpley colour. So for us, we were saying that coaching supervision is a collaborative process. So that's not about supervisor knows best. It's about let's explore this together. Facilitating coaches, we didn't say mentors, but that equally applies. And of course, coach supervisors have supervision too. It's all about growing our effective practice with a view to continuous improvement. And, my sense is that no matter how practiced we've got, even those who are master accredited coaches, there is still room for improvement. We can still hone our craft. We can still stretch our craft. So it's really with a view to ongoing improvement and indeed professional development. And then we talk about client safety and importantly, the strengthening of professional identity. And that is really about when we're contracting with our clients, how is it that we promise to be with them? And I think the more we practice and the more we reflect on our practice, the more accurate we become in describing what it is that we do when we coach. The final piece there kind of really harks back to what the EMCC said at the end of their definition, in that this process considers the entire system surrounding the supervisee and their client work. And our intention is to bring value to all of those stakeholders that are connected to the work. So I'm hoping that kind of gives you a kind of bit of a flavour, a bit of a context for what I see as supervision. And I think, I was just checking my notes. I think now we'll pause and have a bit of a discussion.
Indeed. Thanks for all this introduction. And one thing that I have in my mind, it's about the name of supervision. And based on what you told us, I rather think of supervision as a supervision. It's like having a bigger vision, or how others are like to say about supervision, it's a kind of meta vision.
Yes.
And it's quite different that what supervision it's usually used as a word when it's kind of connected with management, with controlling, and it's not much about this in coaching and mentoring supervision. It's rather a partnering, and it's important to have, I like that, continuous improvement. And
Yeah.
I would like to expand this based on your experience. How do you think this continuous improving it's important for our professional activity?
I think it's really important to keep improving from two perspectives. I think one, there's something about if we're supporting our clients to go to the edge of their learning and to evolve, and that requires vulnerability. There's something about congruence which says, well, shouldn't we also be stretching ourselves too? And I think there's kind of two ways in which we can stretch ourselves. We talk about horizontal learning, which is probably about, the addition of tools and skills and techniques or different psychometrics or different models. They're all kind of new and, useful ways of working with a client. There's also the vertical development, which is of understanding more about ourselves as practitioners, and so that we have a heightened self-awareness that we can bring into those conversations. And it depends on how you seek to coach, but certainly, I believe that self as instrument is a really effective way. So it doesn't necessarily mean you have to lots of whistles and bells in terms of models and techniques. It's much more about understanding what's happening in the here and now and how you might use that as an intervention for supporting your client to think more deeply or more broadly. So I think, professional development is a bit about role modeling, because if we're not working on ourselves, how can we expect clients to work on themselves? And I don't know about you, but, there comes points in my practice when I get a little bit habituated, a little bit bored. And, it may be that something has worked quite well, but it feels stale somehow. So there's something about keeping me fresh, making sure that I'm, got that little bit of an edge in terms of tentative at how this might play out with this particular client, rather than think, oh, right, well, let's apply this technique again. It's a good favorite and it's bound to have some impact. No, actually, to just mix it up a bit to make us heighten our awareness of what's landing and what's not. I think that, that's a useful strategy in itself, just keeping fresh rather than becoming habituated, even if, generally speaking, we have a very good level of delivery.
Mm-hmm. It's a great point. I like this because in my mind, I think when we start in this profession, probably with supervision or with supervisor, we look also for some mentoring while growing and developing as professionals. Probably in when we have maturity on coaching and mentoring, will be great from the supervisor to have some challenges, to have a way of getting out of comfort zone. And this could be also important part from supervision, isn't it?
It's a blend, I think, to both grow to grow the repertoire, to kind of reassure the validity of the repertoire, but also not encourage complacency and to, continue to stretch and develop. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I also like what Nena written. Co-vision could be also a good way to describe supervision. And
Henry Campion uses that term. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is the way I think we can go to the next step. What kind of supervision do we
Okay.
have?
So yes, there's a few slides on what's important. So let's power through those, and then we can get on to the types of supervision.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, why we might need supervision is this is a phrase that not just I have said, Tatiana Bakarova said too, is that coaching can be a lonely profession, and by that what we are saying is it's only you that's in the room with the coach, with the client rather. And so, how do you really validate what's going on? So the coach needs a place to reflect, and actually the client might need a place might need to know that there's some reassurance about the quality of the work. And I think it's particularly complicated when we're talking about organizational coaching, because it's very easy for the coach to get drawn into supporting the individual, perhaps at the expense of the organization. Keeping it in balance is quite a tough job. And again, that's one of the purposes of supervision, to kind of really quality assure, are the stakeholders getting appropriate attention? So I think, the fact that we're there doing the work on our own means actually it's a helpful thing to have an objective person reviewing what we've done. And for those of you who have perhaps done a little bit of reading around supervision, there is often a kind of three-pronged model of saying, well, what is supervision about? And this comes from Proctor, who was in the counselling profession. So she would talk about the pieces in light pink. So she would talk about formative, which is developmental, normative, which is about ethical, and restorative, which is about that energetic rebalance. And what was interesting when I was training myself, I kind of thought, well, actually, isn't it more about the formative and normative? Sure, if it's a restorative issue, that's a counselling thing. I'm not sure that's true as a coach supervisor. But absolutely, when I got into the work, I think because of this kind of loneliness as a coach, often we're independents and we don't have a kind of team around us. Often that's exactly why people will come to supervision, because they need a sense of perspective, they need to cathart, they need just a sounding board to review their work. The bit that's in green is a bit that I've added, which I think there's a distinction between the kind of mentoring element that you mentioned, Vlad, about supervision, where maybe the supervisor helps them develop their skill set, and the transformative element, which is where we really help the coach think about how they can use themselves more fully. So we talk about maybe our somatic reactions, or we maybe talk about our kind of own learning experience and how that's influencing what we're seeing in the room. So that's a bit of an addition. And I think it's probably less the case for novice coaches who are more, they've got their hands full in a way in just getting to grips with their craft. When you've reached a certain level of accomplishment, then it's appropriate to think a bit beyond, well, it's not just the tools, it's about how I'm using the tools. So those are the kind of things that I would encourage people to bring to supervision. And as you can see in the outer circle, all of that is done in service of our clients. And a bit like the optical illusion, let's make no mistake that our client work is really complex. And this is one of those magic eye pictures. I'm sure you've sort of seen them, where when you first pick it up, it's very busy. You can't really work out what's going on. And in order to understand what's going on, you actually don't try harder and kind of try to dissect it. What you do is step back and you relax your eyes. And as you put them into your kind of longer vision, very often the picture, which is a 3D picture, sort of pops into view. And that's kind of a Gestalt notion. So we're talking about what subject and object. So when we're in this complexity, we too are subject to everything that's going on. And it's a bit mind-blowing. We can't quite work out which way's up. It's only when we stand back that we have a bit of perspective and that we can see things that we couldn't see when we were in it, because when we stand back, we can see the client work more objectively. And I think that's definitely what happens in supervision. The supervisor is one step removed, so it's kind of a natural additional meta perspective, as you said earlier on, Vlad. And it's that chance to review what's happened when we're not in it. So I think that's why it's important. Another model which people will probably have come across. I draw it differently because Hawkins' work, when I first met it, I really had to think about that. That's brilliant, and I'm not quite sure how to understand it. So I've put it in a more linear way to sort of look at the various elements. And I'm not going to go through the kind of the 7 eyes right here, right now. But what's important is that, a bit like the optical illusion, we'll be drawn to one of these eyes more naturally. And of course, they're all relevant. So this reminds us that whichever place we start, there are at least 6 other places that could have had equal or indeed more or perhaps less validity than the route we traveled. So in supervision, it's important to say, okay, so now we have got a bit more time. What else was going on that we could have noticed and worked with? But more importantly, how come we chose that particular avenue to focus on? What does that say about us? What does that say about the client? And then we begin to learn about our patterns. So, for example, myself as a coach, my first profession was psychology. My second and most of my career was in HR and organizations. So my biases are about individual differences, individual motivation from the psychology, and from organization politics and organizational cultures, the wider context. So when I'm working, those 2 eyes are second nature. But do I pay equal attention to the rest of it? Probably not. I have to work harder to really think about what's going on right here, right now, between me and the coach. Sorry, me and the client, because it's secondary to my experience. The fact that you know that you could be placing attention, of course, is what, when we're being much more deliberate and consciously competent about our work, and then say, okay, so let's have a look at this because I know it's a bit of a blind spot for me. So I really like the model because it really reminds us just to keep picking up things and say, okay, where else might I have traveled and where might that have taken me? I think the final point I wanted to make was, and we've touched upon it before, is it's an opportunity for quality assurance. So it's so easy to, well, a lot of us are helping practitioners because we have a relational stance, we build rapport, and if we're not careful, that can tip over into collusion. So how do we stay neutral? How do we stay impartial? Supervision can help us see when maybe we're leaning a bit too far into the client relationship and need to rebase ourselves. I used to work for a German company, and they used to have a principle that nothing went anywhere unless it had 2 sets of eyes on the work. We called it the 4-eye principle. And I think it's a very similar thing in coaching. It's really helpful to have a fresh pair of eyes, have a look at things and just notice what we might have missed. So I'm going to pause there. But we might want to go on to the practicalities of the different types of supervision. Up to you.
We can pause a bit because there is something I would like to discuss a bit. When a coach is, let's say, with greater experience, kind of self-supervision can happen. We are used with reflective practice, and it's easier. And to be honest, for me, it was a moment that I was thinking that maybe we don't need so much the supportive part of supervision because we are grown-ups, we are well prepared, and we can take care about ourselves.
Mm.
However, I think lately there are a lot of polarization and a lot of things happening around us using the same 7I model in the wider context. And things like COVID, to take only the recent things, and the war in Ukraine, things like climate change can give us some, let's say, hard time, and we need to discuss this. And we have a very interesting talk in our group practice with supervision on the beginning of March about the war. And it was interesting that I wasn't thinking that the war it's so important and affecting us, but I realized, talking and reflecting, that I really need to bring this discussion about how the war is affecting me and my clients in supervision talk. And I also want to see how you see this supporting part, because usually in UK everything is very how to say, organized, very stable.
Yes, yeah, that's a
Usually you
culture.
have things plans for 2 years ahead, and the calm is there. So how you see this supportive part of supervision?
Yeah, I think there's probably three things on my mind as you ask that question. So I think the first thing is, even before the last couple of difficult years, my experience was, of those 3 or 4 elements of why we have supervision, restorative is central. So I think it's always there, that actually people. I was managing a group the other day, and I've been working with them for about 3 or 4 years, and they're quite well gelled as a group. And I said, look, how much of this could you hold yourselves in dialogue, so that I can maybe take an extra step back and really think about sort of a sharp developmental feedback for each of you. And all of them said, no, we need you to hold us. We are tired of holding the space for other people. And this is the one place we can come to where we don't have to worry about the time. We don't have to worry about, what the dynamics are. That's your job. So I think there's a sort of weariness amongst helping practitioners, because yes, UK is definitely a relatively stable environment to work in. But, for all of us, the pandemic has been a real critical threat. And the world situation right now, is really fear-making. And when, as a helping practitioner, we hold the space for our clients, but they're experiencing this angst. So that kind of existential threat is everywhere. And when we're holding the space, our primary concern is making sure our client is okay, and our needs get slightly pushed out. So we're holding the space for others, but who holds our needs? And that's where the supervisor can do the holding. And of course, the supervisors need supervision too, because the buck doesn't stop just here. What do I do with it all? So I think there's definitely something about, generally speaking, there is a restorative and kind of rebalancing energy that is drawn from supervision. I think of the last couple of years, it's even more so. David Clutterbuck, I was talking to him the other day, and he was saying he's noticing a kind of compassion fatigue, in that, we're all a bit burnt out, because whatever else we work on, there's always this extra kind of overwhelm that we're having to manage. I think the other thing, though, about even experienced practitioners it's just back to that optical illusion. The more you see that there is to be seen. And so, the more experienced practitioners will get the more complicated clients. And therefore, they're quite well defended, or that it's very complicated political systems that they're part of, political with a part, small p. And so, there's no shortage of territory to explore. So I would certainly think, yes, there's something about the more seasoned practitioners have probably got more resources to self-reflect, and their clients are probably much more challenging too. So you still need supervision.
True. Yeah.
That would be
I
my
fully
shell.
agree with you. Thank you very much. So we'll go back.
Okay. Where is it? Okay, so we're looking at the practicalities here about the different forms of supervision. And I tried to simplify this in terms of, I think we've got a 2x2 matrix when we think about the main forms of supervision. We've got what's the type of supervisor that's holding the space, and we've got how many people are involved. So on the left-hand side, we've got professional supervision, and that could either be group or it could be one-to-one individual. And then we've got peer supervision. And again, that could be in a group or it could be one-to-one. So these are the main four forms of supervision. Obviously, some of it's done in person, some of it's done like this virtually, or even by phone, or sometimes by email or chat. It's not something I do, but some people do it. And in terms of comparisons, well, in terms of the pros and cons, they're kind of equal but different values. So it's really about what you decide to choose, what's relevant for you. With individual supervision, obviously, there's more time for the individual. Certainly, I would say that that doesn't necessarily allow you to cover more client cases. It could do, but why individual supervision is often chosen is because it allows you to go into more depth. So I had an hour this morning with somebody, and we spent the entire hour on one client. Just as I was saying before, she's a mature practitioner, but her client is very well defended, and the organization that he's in is like mind-blowingly complex and mind-blowing political. So, we took a whole hour, and we probably could have taken longer. And that's just one client. I think the downside with individual supervision is no matter how experienced the supervisor, that is only one person, and they will be trained in a particular way. Like myself, I'm quite eclectic, but nonetheless, it's all coming from my map of the world. And of course, it will cost more because there's only one person to fund the supervisor. By contrast, in group supervision, you'll naturally get more perspectives. You've got the rest of the group that will feed in to give a point of view. It costs less as well. So, the supervisor's time is being divided by 4 or 5. The downsides are, though, that you get less time. And even though you've got multiple perspectives, there is a limit to how deep you can go. And that, it's one and the same problem. Less time, less depth. So pros and cons. And then when we think about professional versus peer, the difficulty with professional supervision is price is often seen as a barrier to entry. People like myself have chosen to train as supervisors. That cost us money. And so there's something about, well, we do need to recoup that investment. It's also about a formal commitment, and depending on how much of your portfolio is occupied by coaching, that may feel too burdensome. What we hope, though, is that professional supervision will be more comprehensive. So most supervisors, for example, will be trained in that 7-eyed model that I mentioned earlier. So we're automatically thinking in 7 different dimensions at the same time. By contrast, peer supervision is more accessible. It can appear safer. So because many supervisors will be quite experienced coaches, it might be difficult to open up and say, I think I messed up on that occasion. Whereas if you're talking to somebody who you trained with, a peer, it's probably much easier to say, I think I messed up. Have you done that too? So there's a kind of comfort factor, because people are at similar developmental stages, rather than wanting to appear like the perfect coach. Especially if your supervisor, you're going to ask them for a reference at some point. Do you want to fess up to somebody who's going to be saying yes or no to an accreditation reference? The difficulty with peer supervision, though, is that there is the danger of developmental stagnation. Whilst obviously your counterpart can give you an alternative perspective, if they've been trained in the same way as you have, or have just been practicing for a similar length of time as you, the likelihood is that you'll be at a similar level of development, and therefore they won't stretch you in the same way as a supervisor might. So again, it's they're like apples and oranges. You're not comparing like with like. Both are valuable, but they are different.
Indeed.
So let's just pause there.
Yeah, I think here it's probably the place to compare supervision with intervision.
Well, I think intervision is often the way of signposting peer supervision. I know particularly in Europe, it's a phrase that's used. And again, it depends on how the intervision or peer supervision is facilitated. So there will be some intervision sessions that are held by a practitioner who is not then participating in the casework. So they're facilitating like a professional supervisor would. And that, that takes us to more of a professional supervision feel. But of course, it depends on how well trained they are as a supervisor, and how experienced they are as a coach, as to how closely that would look like professional supervision. I think the other configuration of intervision is where everybody kind of rocks up and maybe takes a turn in managing the space, or that it's kind of left to an emergent discussion as to maybe somebody takes responsibility for time, things like that. That has more of a peer feeling to it. And as I said earlier, that can be really helpful in terms of helping people be comfortable with reviewing errors and reviewing their work in a safe space. And there might come a point when there's a limit to the collective experience. It swings and roundabouts. And yeah, I haven't heard of professional intervision. So, and that's not to say it doesn't exist, but I haven't heard of it. So the concern there is that often in peer supervision, there is a desire to reassure, to say, well, that was okay. I think you did a great job. And all of those things are probably true, but where's the balance? What might have been missed? What else could have been done? And of course, there may well be intervision groups that are very balanced and do all of that stuff. But intervision to me is much more like the peer supervision compared to the professional supervision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is also my thought, that actually when two coaches are working together in peer supervision or intervision, if they don't have a good knowledge of what is supervision, then it's more about professional friendship, dialogue, and reflective practice. And when they have knowledge of and experience of supervision, then they will be in what you call the professional supervision, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's a fair comparison. And what came up to me there as you're talking is it's quite interesting to think about, how do these people come to be working together? So, and could there be any dual relationships? So, for example, maybe somebody's doing some associate work, but they might take a review of their work to the person that's also in the associate company. So there's contamination there, in the sense of, how able are they to be vulnerable? How competitive are they in terms of wanting to win work? Have they seen them work elsewhere? And that might be contaminating what they're noticing in the peer supervision conversation. So there's that's not to say it shouldn't happen, but it's also about checking where the sources of bias might come in.
Mm-hmm.
The other thought I had was a bit about going back to the complexity of our work. I think there's a real lovely marriage between peer supervision and professional supervision, in that, you know, it's really helpful to have one layer of the onion. I think that's a common metaphor, that we peel the layers of the onion to understand what's really at the heart of the onion. And so it's useful to self-reflect, and we begin to see the next layer. Then maybe to go to peers and unpick and get some comparisons and some alternatives, and then we start to see the next layer. But there reaches a point where we think there's something else here that I can't quite reach. And actually, that's a really good use of professional supervision. Why would you pay somebody to help you reflect on that first layer of awareness? Better to do it yourself, or better to do it as peers and bring the real heart, the crunchy stuff you can't seem to penetrate, to somebody who's paid to help you access that. So I think there's a lovely marriage between peer supervision, intervision, and professional supervision.
Great insight. I like what you said. And also preparing to go further with some practicalities of supervision. I also launch a question to you to think of it. If it's better to have supervision sessions with different supervisors, or to have it with the same supervisor?
Both. So I think there's definitely something about, I see supervision as a longitudinal relationship. So almost by definition, if you're constantly changing supervisors, they are not seeing your developmental journey. So there is something for me when I work with my supervisees to sort of track and map how they are developing as a practitioner over time. And I can only do that because I'm seeing them regularly. Having said that, my phrase is that every supervisor has a shelf life. You know, on the cans of good, whether it's best before or used by, there comes a point when a supervisor may well be supporting you in the same way as they've always supported you. And actually, that, if we're thinking about broadening perspectives, so that when you can kind of anticipate what your supervisor is going to say, that's probably a sign that they're reaching their end of their kind of useful life. Now, in my own experience, that happened with one of my supervisors, and I don't think I was quite ready to let go of her. But I said, I kind of feel like we need something else. And when we really inspected it, she was my supervisor when I was qualifying. And so there was a developmental tone. I was always bringing to her the stuff that I thought I'd messed up with, the stuff that I was stuck with, the stuff that I could have done better than that. And actually what I never brought was my successes, my flag waving. Oh my goodness, that was an excellent session. You wouldn't believe what came out of that. So we reshifted the balance. And for a year, we worked on me bringing my successes, exploring my strengths, embedding my strengths. And it gave a new lease of life to our relationship. We did then part company a couple of years later because I felt it was time for me to experiment something else. So I think the two things are true. It's good to have an ongoing supervision relationship. It's also good to mix it up a bit over time, because you will get habituated in what you bring and how the supervisor helps you, which goes back to our point about, the supervisor needs to continue to keep fresh too. If you want to keep your supervisees for longer, then you need to keep on finding new ways of helping them.
Yeah, and I think it's also true for coaching and mentoring.
Yeah.
You don't stay with the same client for too much long.
No. It can create dependence, which isn't helpful for either party.
True.
So let's move on to how do you know what supervision you need? And I think there's a few things to consider: your learning style or personality type, how often, for how long, and whether there's some logic in matching your client work with the format of supervision. And it's interesting, when I talk to potential new supervisees, I'll say to them, well, what's your sense? Are you looking for individual or group supervision? The vast majority of people have a very quick answer. They kind of know, perhaps because they're more introvert or more extrovert, where they're going to feel most comfortable. And there's also something about experience. Some people have had some really unfortunate experiences of groups. And if that's the case, they're not going to want to be vulnerable in that kind of setting. So it's important to have a conversation about where the supervisee is going to learn best, because they certainly need to have a sense of psychological safety if they're going to unpick their work. So there's no absolute answer, but I think it's looking inside oneself to understand and what works best. My preference when I'm working with people is for them to have a mix of supervision, both individual and group, for the reasons we've kind of outlined earlier on. Frequency, well, my understanding is that EMCC recommends a minimum of 4 times a year, and that feels for me like a really good backstop. Coming from the supervisor's perspective, if I'm not seeing somebody 4 times a year, how am I really going to hold in my head where they are in their journey? I need to be seeing them reasonably regularly in order to have a sense of their work, even if they're a part-time coach. Of course, the trouble is that, if somebody has got a relatively low caseload, how often do they come and it might feel like there's nothing to bring. I have this struggle sometimes with internal coaching clients where, they perhaps have got 1 or 2 coachees on at any one time. They come to supervision and they're not really sure what to bring because they haven't got enough client sessions underneath their belt. By contrast, if you're only meeting 4 times and you're a full-time coach and you're really, got a volume of clients, there's no way you're going to get through them all in an hour a quarter. So that kind of density is something that you have to work through between supervisee and supervisor in terms of, well, what kind of frequency would be right to cover off your portfolio across the year? And the other question is, how long? And, the swift answer is, well, how long's a piece of string? Because it isn't an absolute formula. I think if we look at the 2 different types of supervision, individual, for me, it's a minimum of 60 minutes. How else do we start to get underneath the skin? For me, 90 minutes is my preference. I really don't know where that comes from, other than as a coach, most of my sessions were 90 minutes. And I also kind of feel like, in supervision, by the time you've kind of explored the territory, you've probably used the best part of an hour. And it's really around the turn of the hour that you start to identify the sort of nugget of what the matter is all about. Having said that, I also would offer, ad hoc or emergency sessions. And sometimes, we neither would have the diary time for it to be 90 minutes. So it can be less. But that's also a signal as well. If you're doing a lot of emergency sessions, then maybe the frequency of the supervision needs to be greater. My personal preference is to plan supervision so that people know when they're going to come, they can plan what they bring. In group supervision, a classic example that I do is 5 people, 5 times a year, and each session is 3 hours duration. We'll have a break halfway through to sort of break up the screen time. And that means that perhaps 3 or 4 people each time have about 30 minutes to bring something. So it's swifter, but it's still a good chunk of time. But it does really vary on the supervisor and how they prefer to work. I have a range of groups. The entry point for me is actually a flexible group where it's only 4 times a year and it's only 90 minutes. And it's like a speed supervision. So each person then does get a turn because I make sure everybody that attends has a slot, but they'll only get 10 or 15 minutes. And that's a very different feel to the one I've got on screen where it's a fixed group. They know that they're going to meet again in that configuration. And there's a more perhaps relaxed tone to it. So I guess the key thing is, talk to the supervisor about what they offer and see if there's a a good fit between the kind of shape of your portfolio and what they're offering. Was there another one? Oh yeah, this is really about the type of client work. So I think if all you do is individual supervision, then it's less critical, the kind of format of the supervision you receive. But if you're doing group coaching, then absolutely, I think, a bit back to that congruence issue. If you're facilitating a group, then it's helpful for you to understand what it's like to be part of a group. So I would encourage anybody who's doing group coaching to engage in group supervision. Similar sort of rule applies if people are team coaching. Again, it's not quite a group situation. Teams and groups are different, but I think group supervision would be useful because of the variety of perspectives, and also ensuring that the supervisor themselves really knows what it means to be a team coach, because then you've got that kind of additional understanding of what it feels like to hold a team in a room. So I think there's a bit of a matching that needs to go on in terms of what you're delivering and what you're receiving in terms of supervision that's overlaid on your personal preferences. So even if you don't particularly like being part of a group yourself, but you're delivering group or team coaching, I would highly recommend that people get engaged in group supervision. So I'm going to pause there again.
Mm-hmm. I also want to ask you about the group mix. Do you think mixing the people, the coaches based on what kind of coaching they are doing could be relevant? For instance, people who are doing life coaching with people who are doing executive coaching should be together or should be in different groups?
I'm quite happy that they're in the same group, and I say that for two reasons. One is that most coaches that I know do a bit of all. So, you might have somebody who does do executive coaching, but also will do some private career coaching or life coaching, and vice versa. I think the other thing is the whole point of group supervision is about diversity of perspectives. So it's brilliant because the life coach, who's a pure life coach and never works in an organization, might spot things, might ask what appear to be naive questions, but actually they're hugely insightful because they're going, well, that doesn't make sense, or why would you do that, or why would you allow that? So I think there's a lovely tension in not understanding the context, because that's where really good questions and really good observations can come from, and vice versa. Somebody who's only ever worked in a tripartite way where the objectives are set by the organization is going to be slightly mystified about the energy that comes from somebody who's a private client and has got nobody else checking in on progress. So I think that's a lovely tension that I'd really encourage.
Great. And I didn't notice when the time flew, and we are near to finish, and I would like to have several minutes more with you, because I would like to talk a bit about your preferences. And I will start with a question. Are you also doing walking supervision or nature supervision, or only online or face-to-face?
Only online. So I have just one client who lives in the same town as me, and we have definitely been outside, and we've been on the beach doing supervision. But to be fair, the pandemic has driven all of my work online. Now, I hear of people who will go for, they will be in two different locations. They'll both walk, and they have, headphones in. I haven't tried that yet. I'm quite tempted by it, but I think I worry about two things. I worry about confidentiality, because where all around me, although I'm by the coast, the path is very populated. So they would only hear my side of the conversation, but it doesn't feel very confidential, very private. But what I like about the possibility is being able to use nature as inspiration. So I think that is much more impactful when you're physically out in it together. What I will do is use it in a reduced form. So pictures of nature, or inviting people to go in their garden and, you know, maybe look at a tree for inspiration or something like that. So it's little pieces of it. I haven't yet been brave enough or had the opportunity to be in two different locations and to use the outside world to inspire. I'm sure it's possible, though.
Yeah, I think so. Any preferred techniques?
A few, yes. So I was just going to whiz through. This is my favorite arrivals technique for a couple of reasons. I mentioned I'm quite visual. I also developed these images with a photographer called Charlotte Housden, and that's her photography. She's also an occupational psychologist. So we're developing ways of working with these images. And, you know, it's fascinating when you choose an image to introduce yourself. People reveal stuff and that, you know, perhaps they hadn't expected themselves, but it almost always goes to a slightly deeper level than saying, you know, this is who I am and this is how many badges I've got on my arm. It feels like a very different way of introducing oneself. There's something in the book, number 42, about, it's called deliberately self-centered supervision. It's perhaps for more mature practitioners, where we're really thinking about how are we showing up with the person in front of us, and therefore the whole supervision starts with understanding ourselves and our triggers and how we show up, and really exploring that to ensure that we're at our best self when we're working with our clients. And then one in groups. I love the kind of constellation work when we're kind of trying to unpick a situation, and we actually use group members to kind of represent different elements of the system, and then just tapping into whatever wisdom is emerging. It's a very flexible technique. I'll also use this in individual sessions with Post-it notes or buttons or Lego. So the principles are really sound, and it's always very illuminating as to what else pops up. The last one would be really, it's written in the book by Clare Norman, called Rush Writing. I try to do this at the end of every, certainly group call, and increasingly every individual call, but just giving people a couple of minutes to journal their thinking and their learning from the session. Recognizing, I think, increasingly that as soon as you drop the phone, life happens. And so people may intend to capture it later, but actually once they're off the Zoom call, you know, it's very difficult to get back into that zone. So by giving them just 2 minutes to do some rush writing, to capture their thoughts and their learning, seems to be working really well in terms of just embedding the session. So that's about it.
I will use this, and I invite all the people looking to us to do it after our session.
Yeah, so, good idea.
Yeah. And there is a special offer for your book.
Yes, so here we go. If you go on to Routledge.com, they are the publishers. There is a code FLR40, and that will give you 20% off the book.
Great. We love some discounts. And for me, to be honest, it's amazing. I never thought someone can gather so many techniques for supervision. And it's like a great journey for both supervisors and coaches and mentors.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I just re-showed this slide because the reason there are so many is because we can hold very different philosophies as we supervise. So we look at 10 10 different ways of thinking and approaching supervision. And then within that, there are different techniques that fit that particular philosophy. And that feels really important to me because, we have to honor, I think, where these techniques come from. A great example that I often use is English. Well, a lot of people use the 2-chair technique, sort of putting people or asking a person to switch chairs to look at things from a different perspective. And yet that comes from the Gestalt tradition. And so unless you're really understanding, well, what's the thinking, the mindset that a Gestalt practitioner holds, you're going to be caricaturing that technique. So the book is an opportunity not just to experiment with different tools and techniques, but to get underneath the philosophy behind those techniques so that you can do it in the spirit with which they were intended. So there's the end of the sermon.
Yeah, thank you very much. It is a lovely talk with you and a lot of insights. I would mention two things that are still on my mind. One, and I think you mentioned Tatiana Bachikora, and I love her mini selves.
Yes.
And the way you told me that you was thinking from different experience of yourself, and this is an important value for supervision. And also, I think you start the presentation with a definition from EMCC, and it's a brand new definition, and it's one thing that we have to keep in mind, that our profession is very dynamic and is evolving continuously. So our continuous improvement is needed. And from Nena, we have the illusion picture at the beginning was amazing. Can you use it, quoting you as the source or some other source it is from?
Well, it's a great question, and I got it from Google, and I do not know the original source, so it's certainly not mine. But I would invite you to go onto Google or some other search engine and put in optical illusion, and maybe, I don't know how I found it. It'll be on the images section, but no, it's not mine. I found it.
Great.
But you're free to use it. It's it's out there as a public resource. I just can't tell you who drew it.
Also, thank you from the feedback from Andrea. And one last thought from you, Michelle. What do you think is the greatest value added brought by supervision?
Well, I'm going to cheat because I was on a webinar on Monday and somebody said this, and it really echoed for me. They said, when supervision is working at its best, the supervisor activates the coach's inner wisdom. And I think that's lovely.
Yeah. We'll, how to say, we'll keep to our heart this. It's really lovely ending for our talk. And it was a real pleasure to have you here. And once again, our congratulations for your EMCC award. And for sure, many of us will follow you on LinkedIn because some of your techniques are there. So keep in touch, and hope we'll have other occasion to see you with us. Thank you very much, Michelle.
Thank you, Vlad.
And a good day for everybody.
Yes. Bye for now.